I used to believe I was one of the luckiest women alive. I had a best friend who had been by my side since we were 8 years old, and a boyfriend who made me feel like I was the center of his world. My mom always told me that friendship and love are the two most precious gifts in life, but she forgot to mention what happens when those two precious gifts team up to betray you. Before we dive in, let me know where you are watching from today. And if you enjoy stories about truth and resilience, hit that like button and subscribe. What my dad revealed that night changed everything I thought I knew about my family. My name is Nora, and at 26 years old, I thought I had my life pretty well figured out. I worked as an interior designer at a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio, spending my days transforming empty spaces into beautiful homes for families who trusted me with their visions. I lived in a cozy one-bedroom apartment about 20 minutes from my parents' house, close enough to visit regularly but far enough to maintain my independence. My family was small but complicated in ways I never fully understood until recently. My father, William, was 54 years old and worked as an accountant at a local firm. He was the quiet type, the kind of man who observed everything but said very little. Growing up, I always felt like he was watching, taking mental notes, understanding things that the rest of us missed. My mother, Diane, was 52 and had been a homemaker for as long as I could remember. She was the opposite of my father in almost every way. Where he was quiet, she was loud. Where he observed, she controlled. She had opinions about everything from the clothes I wore to the men I dated, and she never hesitated to share them. Being an only child meant that all of my mother's attention was focused solely on me. Every decision I made was subject to her approval. Every boyfriend I brought home was analyzed and critiqued. I learned early on that it was easier to go along with her wishes than to fight against them. But I also learned to keep parts of myself hidden to protect the things that mattered most to me from her constant interference. The one thing my mother never criticized was my friendship with Megan. Megan and I met in third grade when her family moved into the house 3 doors down from ours. She was new and scared, and I was shy and lonely. We found each other on the playground during recess, two little girls who did not quite fit in with the other kids. From that day forward, we were inseparable. Megan was everything I was not. She was outgoing, confident, the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately became the center of attention. Her laugh was infectious, her energy boundless. Next to her, I often felt invisible, but I never minded. Being her best friend meant being part of something special, even if I was always standing slightly in her shadow. My mother adored Megan. She would often say that Megan was like a second daughter to her, and she meant it. Megan spent countless nights at our house growing up, and my mother treated her with the same warmth and affection she showed me. Sometimes I wondered if she treated Megan even better, but I pushed those thoughts aside. I was grateful that the two most important women in my life got along so well. 3 years before everything fell apart, Megan introduced me to Derek at her 27th birthday party. He was 30 years old, tall and charming, with an easy smile that made me feel instantly comfortable. He worked in real estate selling luxury homes to wealthy clients, and he had the kind of confidence that came from knowing he was good at what he did. Our relationship developed quickly. Within 3 months, we were officially a couple. Within a year, we were talking about moving in together. Derek became a regular presence at family dinners, and my mother absolutely loved him. She would gush about how handsome he was, how successful, how lucky I was to have found such a wonderful man. For once, I had done something that met her approval without any criticism. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs that I missed at the time. About 4 months before I discovered the truth, things started to shift in subtle ways. Derek became increasingly busy on weekends, always citing important client meetings that he could not reschedule. He would cancel our plans at the last minute, apologizing profusely but never offering to make it up to me. I told myself that he was just working hard, that his career was demanding, that I needed to be more understanding. Megan changed too, though I did not connect the dots at the time. She stopped calling me as often, and when we did talk, she seemed distracted, her mind somewhere else. She claimed she was focused on a big project at work, something that was taking up all her time and energy. I believed her because I had no reason not to. She was my best friend, the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world. The thought that she might be lying to me never even crossed my mind. It was a Saturday afternoon in early October when my world came crashing down. Derek had texted me that morning saying he was feeling sick and was going to stay home and rest. I decided to surprise him with homemade chicken soup and some cold medicine, thinking it would be a sweet gesture that would show him how much I cared. I drove to his apartment with a container of soup still warm on the passenger seat and a bag of medicine and tissues beside it. I had a spare key that he had given me months ago, so I let myself in quietly, not wanting to wake him if he was sleeping. The first thing I noticed was the pair of red high heels by the door. They were expensive looking, the kind that Megan always wore because she said they made her feel powerful. My heart started beating faster, but I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe his sister had stopped by. Maybe a friend had left them there weeks ago. Then I saw the jacket. It was draped over the back of his couch, a red leather jacket that I had helped Megan pick out last spring. I had been with her when she bought it. I knew every stitch, every button. My hands were shaking as I walked toward the bedroom. I could hear voices now, low murmurs followed by laughter. Megan's laughter. I would have recognized it anywhere. I pushed open the bedroom door and there they were. Derek and Megan tangled together in his sheets, their faces frozen in shock as they saw me standing in the doorway. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The soup container slipped from my fingers and crashed to the floor, sending warm broth splattering across the hardwood. Derek was the first to react. He jumped out of bed, grabbing for his clothes, stammering excuses that made no sense. Megan just sat there, the sheet pulled up to her chin, tears already streaming down her face. I do not remember exactly what I said. I know I demanded an explanation. I know I screamed. I know that Derek eventually admitted that this had been going on for 4 months. 4 months of lies. 4 months of secret meetings. 4 months of the two people I trusted most in the world betraying me behind my back. Megan kept saying she was sorry, that they did not mean for it to happen, that they had tried to fight their feelings but could not help themselves. Derek had the audacity to suggest that maybe this was partially my fault, that I had been so focused on my career that I had neglected our relationship. I threw my spare key at his head. I missed, but the message was clear. Then I turned and walked out, leaving them there together exactly where they apparently wanted to be. The drive to my parents' house was a blur of tears and disbelief. I nearly ran a red light twice. I nearly sideswiped a parked car. By some miracle, I made it there in one piece, though I have no memory of actually driving. I burst through the front door like a hurricane, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. My father was in the living room reading the newspaper. He looked up with alarm when he saw me, his face instantly shifting from relaxed to concerned. My mother came rushing in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She took one look at me and immediately started asking questions. What happened? Are you hurt? Did someone die? Between sobs, I told them everything. I told them about the shoes and the jacket, about finding Derek and Megan in bed together, about the 4 months of lie, about Derek's pathetic attempt to blame me for his infidelity. My father listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each word. But it was my mother's reaction that shocked me to my core. She did not hug me. She did not tell me everything would be okay. Instead, she sat down on the couch and let out a long sigh as if I had just told her something mildly inconvenient, rather than completely devastating. Nora, she said slowly, this is painful, I know, but you need to calm down and think about this rationally. I stared at her, not understanding. Rationally? My best friend and my boyfriend just destroyed my life. What is there to think about rationally? My mother exchanged a glance with my father that I could not interpret. Then she turned back to me and said the words that felt like a second betrayal. Sweetheart, Megan has been your friend since you were children. She is like a daughter to me. And Derek is a wonderful man. these things happen sometimes. People cannot control who they fall in love with. The mature thing to do would be to move on and not let this ruin your friendship with Megan. I could not believe what I was hearing. Move on. Not ruin the friendship. The friendship was already ruined the moment she climbed into bed with my boyfriend. But my mother was not finished. She kept talking, kept explaining how I needed to be the bigger person, how holding on to anger would only hurt me in the long run. She actually suggested that I should be happy for them, that I should give them my blessing because clearly they were meant to be together. I looked at my father, desperate for him to say something to defend me. But he just sat there, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance. There was something strange in his expression, something I had never seen before. It looked almost like recognition. Something inside me snapped. I had spent my entire life trying to meet my mother's expectations, trying to earn her approval. But this was too much. This was asking me to accept my own humiliation to smile, while the people who hurt me walked away without consequences. I stood up from the couch, my tears drying as a cold anger replaced the grief. I looked my mother directly in the eyes and spoke with a steadiness that surprised even me. "Okay, Mom," I said. "Let me ask you something. If Dad cheated on you with one of your best friends, would you be able to move on? Would you give them your blessing and wish them well? Would you worry about not ruining the friendship?" The color drained from my mother's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. She looked like I had just slapped her across the face. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the sound of a car passing by outside. My father had gone completely still like a statue carved from stone. "You cannot answer, can you?" I continued, my voice rising. "Because you know the truth. You know that what you are asking me to do is impossible. You would never forgive that kind of betrayal, so why should I?" My mother finally found her voice, though it came out weak and trembling. "That is different," she stammered. "Your father would never do something like that." My father made a sound, then something between a laugh and a sigh. It was bitter and sad, and it made both my mother and me turn to look at him. "Diane," he said quietly, "I think it is time Nora knew the truth." My mother's face went from pale to ghostly white. "William, please." "Not now. Not like this." But my father was already standing up, his shoulders squared like he was preparing for battle. He walked over to where I was standing and put his hand gently on my shoulder. "Nora," he said, "what I am about to tell you is something I have kept secret for 20 years. I did it to protect you, to protect our family. But after what just happened, I think you deserve to know." My mother started crying, real tears streaming down her face. She kept saying, "No, please stop," but my father ignored her completely. 20 years ago, he began, when you were just 6 years old, I discovered that your mother was having an affair. It had been going on for nearly 2 years. The man was Kevin Patterson, the neighbor who used to live next door, the one you used to call Uncle Kevin. I felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath me. Uncle Kevin. I remembered him vaguely, a friendly man with a loud laugh who used to bring me candy whenever he came over. He moved away when I was 7 and I never saw him again. I found out by accident, my father continued. I came home early from work one day and found them together in our bedroom. In the same bed where I slept next to your mother every night. I looked at my mother, who had collapsed onto the couch with her face in her hands. She was sobbing now, ugly heaving sobs that shook her entire body. "I wanted to leave," my father said. "I wanted to take you and walk out that door and never look back. But I knew that divorce would tear our family apart. I knew it would hurt you, so I made the hardest decision of my life. I chose to stay. I chose to forgive." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was heavy with years of suppressed pain. "But forgiveness does not mean forgetting Nora. Not a single day has passed in 20 years where I have not remembered what she did. I stayed because I love you, because I wanted you to have a stable home and 2 parents who were present. But the wound never fully healed. It just scarred over. I turned to my mother, seeing her now through completely different eyes. Suddenly, her defense of Megan and Derek made terrible sense. She was not defending them. She was defending herself. She was trying to justify her own past by forcing me to accept the same betrayal she had committed. "Is that why you wanted me to forgive them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because if I did, it would make what you did seem less terrible." My mother could not even look at me. She just kept crying, shaking her head back and forth, like she could somehow undo the past 20 years if she moved fast enough. My father squeezed my shoulder. "I am not telling you this to hurt you, Nora. I am telling you because you need to understand that you have every right to feel what you are feeling. Your mother was wrong to ask you to forgive and move on. Some betrayals cannot be fixed with kind words and good intentions. Some things break in ways that can never be fully repaired." I stood there in my parents' living room, looking at two people I thought I knew. My mother, the woman who had controlled every aspect of my life for 26 years, was revealed to be a hypocrite of the highest order. My father, the quiet man I had always underestimated, had been carrying a weight that I could not even imagine. I did not know what to say. I did not know what to feel. So I did the only thing I could do. I turned around and walked out the door. The weeks that followed were the darkest of my life. I went back to my apartment that night and did not leave for 3 days. I called in sick to work, telling my boss I had come down with the flu. I turned off my phone. I closed the blinds and lay in bed, cycling between crying and sleeping and staring at the ceiling. Megan and Derek tried to contact me constantly. They sent texts, left voicemails, even showed up at my apartment door more than once. I ignored them all. There was nothing they could say that would change what they had done, and I was not interested in listening to more excuses. My mother called 24 of times. I let every call go to voicemail. I was not ready to talk to her yet. I did not know if I would ever be ready. On the 4th day, I got a text from my father. It was short and simple. It said, "I am here whenever you need me. No pressure. Just know that I love you and I'm proud of the woman you have become." That message broke something loose inside me. I finally got out of bed, took a shower, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked tired and broken, but she was still there. She was still fighting. I made an appointment with a therapist named Dr. Harper. She came highly recommended by a coworker, and during our first session I told her everything: the betrayal, my mother's reaction, my father's revelation, the complete collapse of everything I thought I knew about my life and my family. Dr. Harper listened without judgment. She helped me understand that what I was feeling was normal, that grief and anger and confusion were all natural responses to trauma. She taught me techniques for managing my emotions, for processing the pain without letting it consume me. I also found unexpected support at work. My colleague Samantha noticed that something was wrong and gently asked if I wanted to talk about it. Over coffee one afternoon, I opened up to her and she shared her own story of betrayal. Her ex-husband had cheated on her with her cousin, and the family had pressured her to forgive him. She refused, filed for divorce, and never looked back. Hearing her story gave me strength. It reminded me that I was not alone, that other women had survived this kind of pain and come out stronger on the other side. I started taking yoga classes 3 times a week. I began writing in a journal every night before bed, pouring out my thoughts and feelings onto the page. Slowly, day by day, I started to feel like myself again. 3 months after the discovery, I finally agreed to meet my father for coffee. We sat at a small cafe near my apartment, and for the first time in my life, we talked like 2 adults who truly understood each other. He told me more about his decision to stay with my mother, about the therapy he had gone through alone because she refused to admit she had done anything wrong. He told me about the years of rebuilding trust, the setbacks and breakthroughs, the moments when he almost gave up. "Forgiveness is not something you do for the other person," he said. "It is something you do for yourself. It is about letting go of the anger so it does not poison your own heart. But that does not mean you have to let the person back into your life. It does not mean you have to pretend it never happened. I thought about his words for a long time after that conversation. I realized that I was not ready to forgive Megan or Derek, and I did not know if I ever would be. But I also knew that I could not carry this anger forever. It was too heavy. It was weighing me down. My mother sent me a letter about a month after everything happened. It was the first time in my life that she had ever apologized to me in writing. She admitted that she had been wrong to defend Megan and Derek. She acknowledged that she had been trying to justify her own past mistakes through my situation. She asked for my forgiveness, not expecting to receive it, but hoping that someday we might be able to rebuild our relationship. I did not respond to the letter right away. I needed time to process it, to decide what I wanted my relationship with my mother to look like going forward. But the fact that she had finally acknowledged the truth was a start. 6 months after my world fell apart, I found myself standing on solid ground again. I had been promoted at work, taking on a leadership role that I never would have pursued when I was spending all my energy on Derek and Megan. I had made new friends, real friends who valued me for who I was rather than what I could give them. I had reconnected with my father in ways I never thought possible. As for Megan and Derek, I heard through mutual acquaintances that they were still together. Apparently, they were planning to move in together. I felt a small pang when I heard the news, but it was nothing like the devastating grief I had experienced in those first weeks. They had made their choice and I had made mine. The betrayal taught me something important about myself. I learned that I am stronger than I ever knew. I learned that I do not need anyone else's approval to know my own worth. And I learned that sometimes losing people who do not deserve you is just life making room for people who do. If you are watching this and you have been through something similar, I want you to know that it gets better. Not overnight and not without work, but it does get better. You do not have to forgive anyone to find peace. You do not have to forget what happened to move forward. You just have to choose yourself over and over again until choosing yourself becomes second nature. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from people you thought would be in your life forever? How did you find the strength to put yourself first? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you have not already subscribed to this channel, so you do not miss any future stories. Thank you for watching and for being part of this community. I hope that wherever you are, you know that you deserve loyalty, honesty, and love from the people in your life. And if you are not getting that, you have every right to walk away.